This is TWiT.
So in some ways, virtual reality has evolved, I'd say, over the past few years as the technology has improved and general awareness of the technology is broadened out. However, a number of scandals have proven that the business of VR has a ways to go, especially in light of a bunch of sexual harassment situations, sexism problem that's kind of rampant through the industry. Joining us to talk about this is Doree Shafrir from Buzzfeed. How's it going, Doree?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. So first, if you don't mind, you wrote all about this. Start us off with a few of the scenarios that kind of built the foundation for the article that you published last week on BuzzFeed.
Yeah. So the biggest news peg was the sexual harassment lawsuit that was filed against Upload in May by their a woman who used to work for them named Elizabeth Scott, and she alleged various sexual harassment and wrongful termination against them.
And why? Because I know UploadVR was definitely has been very respected in the virtual reality industry.
Yeah.
Explain why those allegations involving UploadVR specifically was such a shock to the VR community, and I suppose in combination with everything else that's been going on.
Yeah, so Upload was kind of a linchpin, or is kind of a linchpin of the VR community. They have a lot of classes, they host a ton of events. Their founders were very prominent in the community, and kind of everyone that I spoke to for the story had some connection to Upload. They'd either taken a class there, they went to an event there, they had written for them. They also have a publication that writes about VR. So they kind of had their hands in a lot of aspects of VR. And then in April, they opened an office in Los Angeles. So they are also doing stuff. I'm in LA, so they're doing stuff down here as well.
So you write about how there's been a lot of press about how the VR working world is different than the rest of the world in terms of the way that women are treated because it's new and because, you know, it's an industry where you know, women can get in on the ground floor and, you know, be treated like equals. But that's not really even, you know, it's sort of a utopia. It's the same thing that we kind of heard about when the internet started. There was going to be, you know, it's going to be a meritocracy. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so, you know, I think there was a lot of hope that VR was going to be the part of tech that was going to be different. There was a big story in New York Magazine in September, and the headline was something like, "Women are dominating VR." And, you know, I think the headline was a little hyperbolic, but the sentiment was that, like you said, hey, this is a new field. And there are all these prominent women who are doing great things in it. And now we have an opportunity for women to be kind of on equal footing. And, you know, there are a lot of women in VR. There's a Women in VR Facebook group that has almost 6,000 members. But I think what my article is trying to point out is that there's still a lot of the issues that have been plaguing the rest of tech are unfortunately also plaguing VR.
Yeah, and I mean, you also go on to point out it's not just Silicon Valley. You know, these issues that have followed Silicon Valley have followed tech and gaming. It's also Hollywood, and it's like all of these worlds converging to a point to where, you know, you kind of feel a little silly for expecting that it would. Hopefully, you hope that it would turn out otherwise, but silly for expecting that it would because of all of those components all coming together to a head to create just a mess, basically.
Yeah, you have all these legacy industries that don't have the best track record when it comes to women, like Hollywood, like gaming. And those have been the kind of the foundations of virtual reality so far. So unfortunately, I think we're seeing some of the cracks in that foundation right now.
Well, it seems like UploadVR was really dominated by men. It was mostly men. That, you know, you write that like that part of the accusations are that the women were treated like mommies. You have to clean up after us, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
Did you talk? Are there any spaces? Did you talk to any women who are working on their own thing in VR, or maybe, you know, surrounding themselves with the people that they know the best, which might also be women?
Yeah, for sure. I talked to several women who had founded their own VR companies and, are really disgusted by what happened at Upload and are adamant that, at their companies, things are very different and they are making an effort to hire women. But I do think that this was a wake-up call for VR in general. And hopefully things will change. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of women who are doing really cool things in VR. I don't want to, downplay that at all. But Upload, like I said, really was a linchpin of the community. And so I think that made people especially shocked when these allegations came out.
And we've also talked on this show in the past, and I'm curious to know if any of the women that you spoke to in relation to this article had anything to say on this regard. But not your article has to do a lot with people who are working on the technology or reporting on the technology. But there's also kind of a deeper problem or an involved problem for those who are actually participating inside of virtual reality. Women who are in the virtual reality experience. And you encounter something incredibly personal and violating, even though it's a totally virtual experience. This kind of sexism, almost harassment happening in a virtual space. Did they have any thoughts on how that translates into the users?
Yeah, there was kind of a infamous situation a few months ago where a woman who works for a gaming startup in Austin was sexually harassed in a VR experience. And that led to some kind of calls to action among creators to try to create safer spaces for women within VR. Another issue that I mentioned in the piece is that some women felt uncomfortable at conferences when they would be in a VR experience. And when you're in a VR experience, you can't see or hear anything that's going on around you in the real world. And so, people taking photos of them without their consent, talking about them when they're in the VR experience, that's also something that a bunch of women I spoke to brought up as something that made them feel uncomfortable.
So obviously in the last month, we've talked a lot about Uber, and we've talked about, all of the venture capitalists who have now, taken to Medium to call themselves creeps and then stay on the boards of their companies. But is there, and so we have heard some complaints of people who are saying that we're holding the tech industry to a different standard, that this happens everywhere. And so, it doesn't make it good that it happens everywhere. But what do you say to that? Is what's happening in VR very different than what might be happening, in another male-dominated industry?
I think part of the issue is that tech and VR kind of portrayed themselves as progressive, as, world-changing, as really kind of holding the banner for equality. And so when you sort of espouse all of these things and then your behavior is different, I think people are especially attuned to the hypocrisy of it, for one thing. And I think also, the article I pointed to about women kind of dominating VR, I think people, rightly or wrongly, had a lot of hope for tech and for VR. And so when those hopes get dashed, it feels especially painful. Now, I think this stuff obviously has been going on forever in many other industries. I think maybe in, say, finance or other typically male-dominated industries, there's not the expectation that the industry is going to be progressive or particularly attuned to the needs of women. So I think that might be part of the disconnect there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the work that you're doing to shed light on this, obviously, this is a big part of it, is raising awareness. So we thank you for writing that. And also, by the way, I was handed this while you've been on your book, Startup. You were actually on Triangulation with Megan a few months ago, right?
Yeah.
Around the launch of Startup.
Yeah. So if you are interested in this topic of how the Silicon Valley culture and sort of the feminist aspect of it, not a book just for feminists, but it's a great novel.
Right on.
Thank you.
Excellent. Startup. a novel. You can get that. Really appreciate you taking time to talk with us. Doree Shafrir from BuzzFeed.com. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Have a great night.